what I wanted to do is just share with you some of the work we've been doing at MIT on analyzing what happens on campus and how really innovation happens in the spaces we live. Now, I wanted to start with this picture. Some of you might, who knows this guy? Anyway, so Le Corbusier, one of the most respected architects of the past century. And Le Corbusier and his team in the 1930s did something called the Charte d'Athènes. And the idea there was in a city, we should divide everything. We should have a space for living, a space for working, a space for leisure, and then connections between those spaces. But if you think about a city like this is really totally inefficient. It's really the opposite of what we were hearing just in the previous panel. It's about, today is about flexibility, extreme flexibility. That city of the 20th century is utterly inefficient because you got a space, like a chunk of the city, which is empty most of the time, and then people move to another part of the city with a lot of traffic, and so on and so on. So it's no surprise that since the 1950s and 60s, many people, including Jane Jacobs in the United States, but many others, started thinking about, can we have a city with mixed-use developments where different activities overlap over space? Well, we think that today, with the digital changes we see in our lives, that is changing again. It's about using the same spaces for multiple activities, something that's creating like a new transition between public and private space, between the very structure of the buildings we live in. And let me try to show you that with an example that I took from the MIT campus. Now, what you see here is Boston. I'm sorry, Boston is quite a green city. Here it looks a bit like post-nuke, but it's because of winter picture. But here you see downtown Boston, MIT, like a small city inside the city. Harvard, don't bother up there. And MIT was actually one of the first cities one of the first campuses to be totally covered by Wi-Fi in the early 2000s and to start experimenting with technology everywhere, in the classroom and on campus. And because of this, we've seen a big change in the way people used to work and the way people work today. What you see here is, like a traditional computer room, and here, the way people used to work or the work today. Now, this is a bit extreme. I tried to find the most appalling computer room I could find. It's one of the worst Athena clusters we had on campus. And here it's a sunny day. It's not like it's today with snow and cold. But you get an idea. And the same thing is happening in society, moving from a way of working like this. That's, from playtime, Jacques Tatti's playtime. But really, people have been working in this for decades into something which is much more communal. So what we said is, OK, we know about these changes. What if we could measure them? Because nobody has actually been using data to measure them. And the impressive thing is that technology is changing the way we do this, but then technology can also become the way for us to measure what is going on. And so we started monitoring the MIT campus. The first thing we started monitoring is Wi-Fi activity. So you see all of the hotspots here on campus. Every dot tells you, how much information is going through that in an anonymized way. Then you see here, for instance, people waking up on campus in the morning next to in the dorms and then moving through campus, going to classrooms, going to the labs, going to eat. You see the bubbles is the number of people and how they move during the day. If you look at the total activity on campus, it looks something like this. You see there at the top, it's the overall activity. That's a Monday morning. People get into the campus around 9 a.m. Here you've got 9 to 5, just a few people living at 5 p.m. Not many people work 9 to 5 anymore. Most people keep on working till late at night. Still, in the middle of the night, there's a lot of activity. And the same thing happens on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday. Not on Friday, like all over the world. Here, activity slips away quite quickly in the afternoon. And then Saturday and Sunday are almost like 2 normal days. You remove the 9 to 5 people, they're almost like 2 normal days. With something quite interesting, every Sunday night there's a little dent, what you see there. And it's around between 9 and 10 p.m. And that's when you say, shit, tomorrow is Monday again. And you remember all the things you haven't finished for the next week. So if you look at this, you can do the same thing for every space on campus. And that's like an occupancy signature. So it's the signature that tells you how the space is being used over time. It is a special signature of every room. If you take this conference room, it's full now. It will be empty later during the break. So you get that over time for a given space. And then if you analyze all of them, you can do different things. You can look at Fourier transform to look at the key frequencies of usage of space. Of course, we got the 24-hour cycle, but then we got many other frequencies that tell you how space is used, and you can cluster things. You can look at how different spaces are used in a similar way, how they work similarly. And when you do this and you do clustering, you really find what we were saying before, the fact that the space that used to have a very clear label attached to it now is used in a much more flexible way. Is what you see on this map, that idea of the city by Le Corbusier, or the 20th century city where every space had a clear function, is actually transitioning into something where the same space is used in different ways over time. Now, that's the first thing you can measure on campus. But there's actually other interesting things you can measure on campus. Because if you think about MIT, ultimately it's just a bunch of people on a physical space and doing something which results in publications and papers. So then you can go and look at measures of productivity. So here you see papers and patents, one of the key outputs that comes out of MIT. You see that some buildings actually perform much better than other buildings, such as this building, which is the Data Center. It's where computer science and artificial intelligence lab is. And actually, the interesting thing is that in that lab, you get a high heterogeneity. You can look at measures of entropy on the building, so that tells you how many different people, different communities are there, and that seems to result actually in very interesting changes in productivity in the papers and patents you produce. And you can see that also by then looking at how everybody collaborates, so how all the links between people then results in those papers and patents. So if you want, it's about looking about three variables. It's about physical space, it's about how we connect and collaborate also digitally, and how all of this results in things we produce, in this case, mostly paper and patents. So if you measure all of that, you can almost like crack what is this kind of secret sauce of the campus, of our campus, but many other places. Think about a big company or, that brings people together in order to collaborate in physical space, in digital space, and achieve something together. Now, what we're doing with our design office is actually using some of this to design new offices. That's one of the largest co-working spaces in Southern Europe. It's called Talent Garden, or TAG. It's in Milan. And that actually we took some of the learnings from the MIT campus to do this. One of the key things is you want to create spaces that promote data interaction. The same thing we did in this accelerator that's in South America, where we use the traditional courtyards that actually you have in traditional architecture in South America, and we use that as an aggregator for this space that favors exchanges in the outdoor climate that is very pleasant all year round, and it becomes the aggregator for people to exchange ideas. Or you can go also to a building that more and more responds to people, so that promotes the interaction between people by becoming almost like a living thing. That's a building that's on site at the moment, will be finished over the summer. It's the Agnelli Foundation in Turin. And what we did here, we created a platform that allows people inside to know where they are. So what you can do is three things. The first thing you can do is that you know where everybody is inside the building if they want to share the information. And then you do something like Foursquare inside the building. So you can actually more easily meet other people if they share the status if they want with their friends. So it becomes a way to promote encounters and allow people to book a room and come together using digital and physical space. But the other thing, you can then create like a way that the building itself can go on standby if nobody's there. You can save energy just by, like your computer does. When it's not used, it goes on standby. So the building does the same. It's with heating and cooling. So based on occupancy, it becomes like a responsive dynamic skin. And actually, it's something we're studying in a more kind of research way at MIT. We looked at really where energy goes in buildings. And if you look at this, we waste a huge amount of energy to heat up empty spaces. So the idea for the future is almost, can you think about like a local warming, a way that heating will be and cooling will be focused on people. You don't need to heat the whole space. You can just heat people where they are. We tested this outside MIT. That's the main entrance, 77 Massachusetts Avenue. You step on the carpet, and then this bubble of heat would follow you. Some people freaked out, but most people loved it. I'll show you now what we did with Rem Koolhaas, who will speak tonight here, actually, the Dutch architect. And he invited us to the Venice Biennale to do an installation thinking about what could be a future with a building that responds to occupancy in a dynamic way, with this bubble of heat that follow you. This was at the Venice Biennale, the Rem Koolhaas Venice Biennale last year. And the same thing you can imagine about a building that becomes more and more alive, that responds to people. That's something we did a few months ago with Vitra, the Swiss furniture producer. And we imagine that, again, we want to use spaces for different activities. So imagine you have these kind of pods that can be reconfigured just because you put your hands on them and they move up and down, or through an app, and then they can create different landscapes for meeting, for relaxing, for doing other things. So you just put your hand, it detects it, and then it moves up and down with a small linear actuator. And then each of these things, like a pixel, can be reconfigured, and then can create different conditions and different spaces for relaxing or for working. A little bit like what we were hearing before about how the same space can dynamically then respond to the things we need and the things we want to achieve there. Here's a short video. Oops. So the idea that basically technology on the one hand allows us to better understand what happens in space, but it also helps us to transform space in different ways, heating, cooling, or all the other interactions that can be conducive to what we do at work. And I want to finish here so we can have the panel discussion more on innovation spaces, in particular here in Munich. Thank you.